it's like something you probably wouldn't have seen too often. Yeah, so it's kind of, I honestly, I didn't learn myself till last year when I started doing a lot of like spatial statistics. It's kind of funny because I also built my own R package. If any of you are curious about how to make an R package, I also posted information about that. So I'll just say that like, if anyone wants to build their own package, I actually did create a user guide as how to do that. So that might be something you're curious about because it's kind of good for your CV, right? To say you made an R package. A Shiny app is a good thing to have on your CV. Anyways, I'll start. And there's a couple of things you need, and I might even just put it in the chat if anyone's kind of curious to make their own Shiny app as they're going along. So this is me actually going very gung-ho into the thing, but really your actual script looks sort of like this. So let me just start again. I'll just kind of put this here, and then I'm going to go back to bare bones. So it actually looks sort of like this. I'm going to go back. You'll see that what you actually have is something very bare, right? Something with just this is your bare script, right? And in fact, if I put this in the chat for you guys, just to kind of play around with yourself. So first of all, you have to download download Shiny, right? So make sure you have installed packages, Shiny. So if you guys want to do it interactively with me, just make sure you have this installed, right? But yeah, you will actually see that this is the bare minimum. Right. So if I just put this in the chat, if you guys want to run it yourself and you just kind of take that script, what is it actually doing? So first of all, UI is how you actually build the app. You build the app basically, right? The server itself is going to load it onto a page because really, if you think about it, all of the when we build this app, all of the actual machinery is happening in our art interface basically, right? So when you put this online, it's being in some sense maintained through our R page, basically, at least in this tutorial, it's being maintained through our R page, right? This is the server. But the fluid page is you actually building an input and output function, telling the Shiny app what you want it to do, basically. The server itself is when you want to interface with the audience, you need to obviously specify how you want to interface, basically, right? So if I just put this in the actual console, something funny happens. If I literally just put a bare minimum into the console, which is just this, right? So you can see there's nothing in my actual fluid page. This is where I'm going to put the actual functions. So if you run this and you have a look and so if I just run this app, sorry, I'm going to just run app, run window. You'll actually see that if it actually loads, this is what the Shiny app looks like, but that's not what you have for this one. So if it looks blank. This is how you know your actual app worked because this is my actual app. You see that it looks like this, right? When you have nothing in it, you just get a blank page. Why? Because you haven't asked it to do anything. However, this actually shows your actual function works. This is technically an app that contains nothing in it, right? You have to specify what you want it to do. So let's suppose I wanted the app to say hello world because it's kind of a common example we tend to use in Python a lot, right? If I just put hello world and I run my app, right? What's going to happen? What you will see is, so if I just run this, you will actually see your app will say hello world, basically, right? So you have an app that literally says hello world, which is obviously nonsense, but you can see that the function is actually working. So it seems as if we want the app to do something, it has to go into the fluid page, basically. So let's start building stuff and see what happens. So there's two things you have to consider: the input functions and the output functions. Input functions is if you want the user to be able to change the numbers themselves, you have to be mindful of this in the input function. So for instance, let's suppose I wanted to put a slider input. So a slider actually allows the user to change the level of a certain number. So you can see that I need to put an input ID. I'm going to call it number. So I'm going to call the ID of the thing that people are going to input a value into is called number. The label choose a number is me making it easy for the user when they look at the interface, right? So if it says choose a number, then the user themselves know to scroll around the graph to choose a number, basically. Right, then I need to specify values max and min. So I put value equals 20, but you're gonna see you could be able to change it. but the max and min specifies the range of where my actual values are going to sit. So let's suppose I just have this thing here and I don't, and you can see that when I post this on my GitHub, you can play around with the numbers yourself, right? It's gonna, you can obviously change the graph that we make, and you can even make different plots, right? So if you want to take a different data set, you know, to exist, and you want to play around with it and make a different app than what I'm going to do here, that's totally cool too. So let's suppose I put in, you know, just slider input, and I want to run this app. Well, you might say, what are you going to see, right? So, oops. You might say, what are you going to see? I probably didn't need to do this. I could have just run the app there, but I just like to see what's going on in the console. So you might say, what are you going to see if you do this? You're probably going to see a slider function with no plot because I haven't specified one, right? So when the app comes up, obviously it will change. This is what it looks like right now when I put in hello world, but when my app is finished running, you will see something else if it ever stops. So when it stops turning red, you'll know that it's finished. Why so slow? Okay, let me see. Okay. Let's see. So you're going to see that it's going to do this, right? So obviously it starts at 20 because that's where I specified the thing to start, but I'm going to slide everywhere. I can slide wherever I want to, right? So I can go as low as 1 because that's my minimum. I can go as high as 100 because that's my maximum. Now, obviously, whatever you create is going to have this range of values that you pre-specified. If you want your values to be bigger or less or smaller, then change the function yourself. By the way, there are other input functions. It's not always the case that you want to create a slider. And when I post the R Markdown file, it's going to be more comprehensive. You'll see that there are different input functions depending on if you want to make graphs, tables, spatial plots, depending on what you want, the input's going to change basically. But I'm making a histogram here within the range of 1 to 100. So that's why I'm starting like this. But like I said, the input function can change depending on what you want to actually build, right? So I'm going to post a comprehensive R shiny tutorial. You can see it's, I'm working on it right here. It's going to contain a page where you can see the different input functions and even the different output functions. Because if I want to make a table instead of a graph, I think that would have a different output function, right? So I'm going to steal my previous code. So you can see that in between, so I need to put an input, I need to put an output. The output's a plot. You need to separate them by a comma, right? So if I do something like, you know, if I want to put an output plot, I need to put a comma, then plot the output. Note that if I haven't specified what I want the server to do, you're going to see that when you run this, no plot will actually come out. So you might think it's a bit disappointing at first, right? Because your plot doesn't do anything interesting. So if I, for instance, run this app, it may not look very interesting because obviously I haven't specified, it's going to look kind of the same, right? That's because if you want, so this is a word for the watch. Just because you put an output file of what you want it to do, doesn't mean your app's going to show what you want it to do until you actually put it into the server, right? So if you want a plot to render, you have to put it in the server because it's going to, obviously the backend is obvious. The backend, your R output basically is your R file. But if you want it to load if you want it to load online for people to actually use and start playing with the plots, you have to render it through this function basically. So that's why the function has an input and output, right? That is specifiable, whatever you have as your input and output over here, right? So I'm building obviously a histogram. So my output function is going to be a histogram. This is kind of funny because see, because your backend is R, you have to use the R functions. That's why you have output $sign histogram, which seems a bit strange, but the backend is happening in R basically, right? So we have to use R commands. And you can see here that whatever you wanted to render is the thing you put as your output. So here I wanted to render a plot, right? So the second command here isn't necessarily going to be a plot if you wanted to render something different. So if any of you work on projects and let's say your next level course, let's say spatial stats, or if you are in a course with Yanni, or like maybe you're working with Patrick Brown or something, you will see that if you want to make an interactive plot, your output might not necessarily be a histogram. It could be a table, it could be anything, right? And in fact, I kind of sort of screen capped it here. You can have many different output functions. So maybe you might have a table Maybe you have a text output. If you're like doing web scraping or something, you might have a table, an HTML, right? An image output. Maybe you want to output a picture. It doesn't necessarily have to be a plot. It's just that because we're obviously in the stats course, I kind of took the most obvious example, or just make a plot. But the plot need not even be a histogram. It could be a scatter plot. If you work with if you work with the petals data set, your output might be obviously a scatter plot. But yeah, you could have many different plots. You could even have tables as your output. It depends on what you want the user to see, basically. Actually, when they make those BMI calculators, they're kind of indirectly using these kind of interfaces. Probably not R. They may be doing it in Python or something else, but obviously they're rendering it in the back end of some kind of software, be it C, R, or Python, and then the user doesn't see what's going on in the back end. Just like if we build this app, they're not going to see all this stuff we have here. It's just the output just comes out as is, right? So, okay. So I need to use, because I'm obviously working with R, I'm going to use the built-in R function. So I put output histogram here, and I'm going to pretend that I obviously didn't completely generate this, but let's think about this. This is actually not a trivial amount of code I've kind of written here. It is sort of looks like this. If you just want to do the bare minimum, so it kind of looks like this at first, right? So what you have is output. Let's say hist. So you can see that I added all this stuff in. Sorry, I added all this information, right? So I'm gonna close this. This is me adding all this information inside the render plot. Actually, what you really actually have when you use the render function is just the following. Render plot. It looks like this, right? So you see that you have to add in certain features of what you want it to do, right? So as it is right now, I have to, if I just say something like, let's suppose I just want to make an R norm, or like a histogram, basically, right? If I just say hist of, let's say, R norm, let's say 100 samples. This is a random generator for normal distribution that's centered around a mean of 0 and a standard deviation of 1, right? So if you don't specify a mean and standard deviation, it's the standard normal. The problem with this particular server right now is anyone see what the problem is? So I have an output generated, right? I have an output, but there's something missing. Does anyone know what's kind of missing here? There's something. So if I run this, I haven't connected it to something. What did I not connect this server to? Does anyone know? Yeah, it's not connected to the input, right? So I have no way as it is right now to make sense of my output function with the input function I put in. So your server has to contain both the input and the output. Right now, as it is, the function I've actually developed is taking in an input and output, but the input is not actually showing in the actual function itself, right? So you can imagine if I want to build a histogram where the maximum value is 20, where the maximum value is 100 and the minimum value is 1, of course, I'm going to put it in the R norm, right? So instead of putting R norm 100, I might put R norm input, right? Because I wanted to recognize, I want my output to depend on the input function itself, right? So whatever the value of the histogram happens to be is going to depend on the range of my input values, basically, right? Whereas if I put an R norm, if I just put R norm of 100, well, you know that the normal distribution is a funny thing. We're at the lowest value, something like -3. At the highest value, something like 3. So it won't actually respect the range like actually specified in my input, right? So it will just give me a plot. It's between. You can see if you just have a look at this thing, right? What you got is I won't even show me because I'm in R shiny app. Anyways, you'll get a plot that's somewhere between -3 to 3, and that's not really the range as specified, right? So what I'm going to do instead, let me just stop this for a second. Oh, it's so funny. Okay, I just want to show you. Yeah, I just want to show you what the issue is. You see that if I just make, oh, sorry, I realized actually I didn't do Instagram. Anyway, stop it. Yeah, I screwed up. I forgot to put the histogram. You see that it will just give you a plot. Funny thing about R, it doesn't like if you have a plot that doesn't have wide margins, you have to do this sometimes. It's a very strange feature about R. It doesn't like if you have to stretch the plot. But yeah, you can see that it gives you values between, let's say, -3 to 3, and that's the problem, right? Because obviously our max and min is between 1 and 100. So this is why we have to give a specifying output that's dependent on the actual input itself. If I do this, I'm adding a couple of features here because I want to make this as interactive as possible, obviously, for the user. So in theory, I didn't need to actually put the title here. And you can, when I post this, you can do even more fantastic things, right? You can change the title, you can add more, you can even stretch the limits, whatever you want, right? So you can see I'm doing the bare minimum here just to get some kind of, I'm doing the bare minimum in some sense, right? Just to get some sort of plot that's user friendly, right? So obviously you kind of want the plot, you want the plot to have a title and stuff. So you can see now that my thing is a function of the input, but in particular, because my input ID is num, I have to make sure that whatever I put as the input is a function of the value itself. So this is important, right? The ID can be whatever you want, but it should be unique, right? So because you're going to see that you're going to map your whatever your ID happens to be here, right? So you have to maintain consistency. So yeah, I just put in a title because obviously, yeah, it's generating 100 random normal values, but it's going to do it within a certain range that is specified by my input values, which is between 1 to 100, right? So let's see what happens if we run the app. So this is kind of cool, right? You see, you get, it's just kind of funny. It's a bit silly, right? Like you get a plot that changes as a function of the value you choose, right? So I think that's kind of cool, right? So what is happening here? You get an R norm that's certainly obviously between -2 to 2, but it's permuting the actual values depending on your input. So what is happening here? You know that when you put R norm, in here, it's gonna take a different part of the actual sequence. And so each time you actually generate a new random normal, right, you'll get a different set of numbers. So if I just, for instance, look at R norm of, let's say, 10. Let me stop the app for a second. You see that if I run R norm of 10 again, you'll get different numbers every time, right? So the actual histogram you get will depend on where you actually place your number. And that's what the app is actually showing, right? So it's showing that, well, I think I killed the app, right? So I have to run it again. It's showing that you're going to get a different histogram depending on where you actually start your, your permutation, right? So wherever you start your permutation, you will get a different graph, right? So sometimes you get sparsity. Actually, we can improve this graph here. Does anyone know how we can improve this graph? The problem is you can see that there's some bins that are kind of empty. If we actually change the limits a little bit bigger, if the input values are kind of bigger limits, maybe if we put, let's say if you put like 1 to 1,000, we can see what happens to our histogram. You can do that yourselves for sure. And we can even change what happens if we specify different mean and a variance, and if we specify the bin. So if you look at the histogram itself, you can actually change the bins, right? So if you look at the histogram function here itself, I'm going to kill this for a second. If you look at the histogram function, you can actually change a lot of features of your graph that the audience sees. And I encourage you guys to do that when I post this thing, because it's kind of cool, right? So you'll actually see that you can actually change the bins, because what we saw in our app was sparsity. Since we didn't have a very large, we're taking 100 values, which isn't that big necessarily. So what happens is sometimes when you see that there are some parts where the frequency is low and so it is empty, right? That looks kind of, you can cover that up by changing the bins. I think there's a default bin of 30 maybe. You can make the bins smaller. So if you do something like bins equals, let's say 5, and you stick it inside the actual histogram somewhere in here, right? So if you put bins equals 5, I'm not going to do it, but if you do something like this, you'll see that you'll actually change. You will change the, oh wait, I'm missing a, yeah, Instagram or norm. Yeah, there you go. If you change the bins, you'll get a smoother graph, right? So sometimes you get a coarse graph when you don't have enough, you don't have observations. You can change the bins if you'd like. You can even change it from frequency to probability, right? That's something you can do as well. If you change it to density, that would give you, instead of giving you course, thins, you would have an overlay of like a smooth curve. You could change the color of your histogram as well within the thing. So I encourage you guys to change your app a lot if you'd like. So you can get you can change, of course, the color. You could even take your own day. You can even take your own previous work. If you in the previous have done like, even in this course, if you've done papers, and you wanted to make, for instance, tables, you can now put the tables in your Shiny app, but you need to render to table, not plots. So next time he asks you like to do a tutorial and it's like making a Shiny app or even doing a paper based on any kind of replication, you can kind of certainly use a Shiny app and make your assignment go up a little bit and also learn something in the process, right? So let's see if we can kind of change our features a bit just for fun. Let me see. Let me take color equals red. Red's with your color. So I always take the opportunity to see if I can change things to make things look more red. Let's see if this will work in our app. Yeah, you see you can change the color. So it's really neat and cool, right? So you can do whatever you want to kind of enhance your plots. Because I obviously don't think this is the best you can get, obviously, right? But you can see that everything looks the same as it did before, except now the colors change. And even that makes the plot look way better, in my opinion. I think that, yeah, it's just me. Yeah, so there's tons of stuff you can do. I guess when I was looking at when I was making it my first Shiny app, what I actually saw as an example was the petals data set. So you could even do scatter plots if you'd like. But then the thing is, for an input value with scatter plots, you need to give both an X and a Y value, I believe, right? So because you can see this is a value of X based on one set of points. If you want to make a scatter plot, you need to probably provide an X and Y pair instead of just giving a value of X, right? So your output would be based on two sets of values instead of one, right? Whereas here, this is a histogram, right? Does anyone have any questions so far? So actually building the app is not that difficult because it's all happening under this line of code. And you'll actually find yourself memorizing this code that I gave you in the chat because it's the backbone to building any kind of interface. So you'll find yourself memorizing that code where you have a fluid page server and the Shiny app, right? So the Shiny app is the part where you put it onto a web page. Now, if I wanted to publish my page, you can see that I would go to publish and put it somewhere, right? Obviously, so if you guys just wanted to put yours on your GitHub, that's kind of, you can do that as well, obviously, right? So you could post yours on GitHub if you'd like to. If any of you are kind of curious and you want to build your Shiny app now, even though Tutorial 7 already passed, because I don't think anyone turned in Tutorial 7 according to Rohan, which is totally fine. I get it. It was reading week. The Shiny app seemed very difficult. And then even replication itself seemed hard. So I definitely thought that one thing I felt bad about that. So this is why I wanted to, do the app today, because I realized people were probably a bit overwhelmed with the material, but I think it's actually not that bad. And you can get more crazy than this. This is just very simple in the level where I'm just manipulating. Actually, all the BMI, has anyone ever used the BMI calculator online? Ironically, they're doing this, right? But they're probably using Python or something instead of R. But in the back end, they're building this exact same thing where they've built a function and they have a server that puts a function out there to people. It's the same kind of thing. Does anyone have any questions? I guess so far I should stop and ask if anyone's like confused as to what we've done so far. Is it kind of clear as to, at this point I can go open up to questions. If anyone has any questions, let me know. Anyone have any questions? Or I'll ask this. Does anyone want me to add anything into the actual R Studio, the R interface? When I post the actual, when I post the R Markdown file that contains the step-by-step to do this, I can imagine this is a bit daunting. Does anyone want me to include certain things? Like if you do want me to include certain things to make it a bit more accessible to you, let me know. And now in the chat. That way I know what to include, because I don't know what you guys want, but if there's something you guys necessarily want me to include in it, let me know. If you want me to show more examples, I can, I guess. No, you can see this is all happening that that R markdown script I had, you didn't need it. The app.r is doing it itself, basically, right? It's all happening in this page here. It used to be the case that you needed 2 different pages to do it, but I think they've updated this Shiny app to amalgamate. So you actually only all of the interfacing is happening on this page here. It used to be the case that you needed actually to have 2 different pages, but I think they amalgamated it into one. The page I had before was just me making an R markdown sheet, so I could kind of make it user friendly for people to go back and look at it themselves. But you only really need this 2 lines of code here, which is UI server, and then obviously the Shiny app here. The Shiny app thing is the one that translates it to online. Any other questions? No worries. Anyone else have any questions about the material? Is anyone in their 4th year? I'm curious. Anyone in their 4th year of studies? Is anyone in their last semester of their undergrad degree? Or is everyone here in 3rd year? Because I think that Rohan asked me to discuss after, I guess okay, cool. Is anyone considering grad school? Oh, 2nd year, awesome. That's really fast, Annie. And I'm surprised. Although I guess in theory, if you took 302 in the 1st semester of like your 2nd year or something, or if you're taking it now, you could in theory be doing it concurrently with 304. Yeah, so I think paper 2 was you had to use one of the TA's papers, and you were doing a replication study, right? I think he's posting paper 3 tonight, actually, ironically. So today he's posting paper 3 today. I definitely understand paper 2 was hard. Maybe that's also why people didn't want to do tutorial 7. It probably seemed a bit much after doing the paper 2. But I will say that this is actually a really practical hands-on class. So you will learn quite a lot. It's a very heavy in coding, but you learn quite a lot. I think paper 2 is actually being marked right now, if I'm not mistaken. You guys just turned it in recently. I think it's currently, this TA is looking at it. I think it's not me, but the other TA that's looking at it right now. Paper 3, I think I might be marking paper 3 myself. Does anyone have any questions? Oh, is it possible to load a CSV file as an input and give it an ID? That's a good question. I don't think I've tried it, but in theory, I think it might be possible to, probably actually you could, especially as you think about it, there are some interfaces, there are some pages, there are some web pages where the actual input is the data, it's a data file itself, right? So it's entirely possible that you can load, I don't know if it's a CSV file, but your input can be a table itself, most likely. I'm not sure if it would be a CSV file, but if you do have a CSV file you want people to actually look at, what you can do is you can of course create an internal data frame from your CSV file, and you can certainly put that as an input ID, I believe. I think you can put data as an input ID. I'm not sure if you can put a CSV file, but if you do want to put data as an input ID, I believe you can internally, if you load your CSV file into R, you can create an internal data frame that you can use as the input ID, because it is possible to have an input and an output with the table itself. I'm just not entirely sure if it's a CSV file that can go in there. Although ironically, you can have HTML files as output files. I don't think you can have CSV files as output files, though, to my knowledge. Let me double check and see. Yeah, you can have a text output, which in theory, a text output could be a wall of data. So a text output, to be clear, guys, could actually have like a wall of data, right? You can imagine you could have a CSV file of data. That could, in theory, be your text output. But I don't think you can have a CSV file that is itself necessarily output. But you can see that because you can have an interactive table itself, your input could definitely be data or a tabular thing you put in as an input. And even the output itself can be a tabular thing. I don't think you can put a CSV file though. But to get around that, a way around that is to obviously use the internal structure. Anyone else have any questions? That was a good question though. And honestly, I'm going to post for you guys when I post the R Markdown file sometime probably later in a couple of days. Maybe not. You will actually see the YouTube will go up right away, but the R Markdown file might be a little bit longer. But you will actually see that I'm going to put I'm going to put all the possible input functions itself. You will see that some of them are tables. So you'll actually see that what the possible things you can do in your Shiny app are. You can do amazing things. Like you can create your input can be a map itself that is very interactive, right? Yeah. So right now I'm in spatial statistics. So for me, an output would be like a very nice map, like a plot that is a spatial plot. The people are kind of moving around. But you could even have like, tables. You can even have packages. I don't know if any of you have ever built your own packages in R. I have. I'm in the process of trying to actually publish my package onto my GitHub, which you'll actually see that you can push your packages into your Shiny app, especially if your package does something cool externally in an interface. You can push your package through the Shiny app. Again, if your package has some kind of neat feature, where it does some kind of interesting command. Mine actually, the package I developed actually converts empty grades to 0 and converts -1s to NA, right? That's because I was in education, and in education, we put -1 to mean exempt. And we put NA to be equal to the student didn't submit their assignment. So I push NA to 0, the student didn't submit the assignment. -1 means they're exempt. So I push that to NA so that I don't mark them as 0 basically. So this is my function does, and I can do it externally. So for me, I developed a function that allows me to determine which students didn't actually necessarily finish didn't submit their assignment, right? So if a student did not submit, there's their NA, as in like they didn't submit anything, goes to 0. So I know that they didn't do their work, and then -1 goes to NA, as in they were exempt. So I can actually put an interface where people can put in 0, or can put in NA, and it will go to, like, let's say 0, and -1 will go to NA interactively. So if you have any packages, you can do that as well. I think it's kind of really kind of neat how Shiny app can work with your packages. So that's why I said that if any of you are really curious about building packages, you can toggle around my GitHub and try to build your own package too for fun. It's very user friendly. So my actual interface to building a package is very user friendly. It does go very slowly, and I really elucidate how to build a package. So you can develop your package from my thing, then try to push your package to Shiny app and see what happens. It's pretty neat, I think. So I think it's pretty cool, and it's useful. If any of you have grad school aspirations, if you can develop your own package and make your own Shiny app beforehand, that's a huge bonus, I personally think. When you want to apply for grad schools, it makes you a bit stand out, right? So definitely something that would put you ahead. And if you are curious as to where my actual where you would build your own package, I have it here. So I think I put tutorial here. Yeah, I put it. It's there's an R script here as well as the PDF file. So it's kind of here. And I will also post. I will make another thing that's probably called. So I posted lectures for I posted tutorials for STA304 in my repository. So I posted here. So you will find it here. So I had tutorial 6 files over here, which was the maps I made. So I will post tutorial 7 over here. And I'll post this recording on my YouTube page. So if you guys want to go back again afterwards, you certainly can. And you can generate this plot yourself, then change a plot and see what you can do with your own Shiny app. So you can start from here. The best thing to learn code, the best thing to do is obviously play with someone else and change it slowly, but then you'll eventually figure out this is pretty user-friendly, and you'll probably, it's a point where you're making your own apps. Does anyone have any questions about this? Today's tutorial. Hopefully it was kind of clear and you feel you can build your own app when this is over. But I definitely, I think initially Rohan wanted me to discuss grad school, but then I figured that like people deliberately skipped this tutorial a bit because it felt a bit daunting. So I felt that probably the appropriate course of action is to go back and repeat the tutorial so we can get something practical. But if you do want to talk about grad school, you can certainly let me know. Because I can offer a lot of insight there as well. If any of you are in 4th year and considering PhD studies or master studies, then let me know. I'm happy to assist you on things that might be useful in cultivating a very good package, because obviously I'm a PhD student. And so I had to write it myself at some point. And I still write them when I apply for grants and scholarships. So if anyone's kind of interested in grad school and you want to discuss that, that's certainly cool as well. And I'm happy to talk about it. Otherwise, if you don't have any questions, I will sort of leave you to ask questions, or you can feel free to hang around. I think I have office hours for an hour after this. So if you're kind of good, that's fine. If you want to ask questions about the Shiny app or anything else, I can hang around. If you're curious about paper 3 or paper 2, I can also hang around. It's up to you guys. Other than that, I guess this was a tutorial. No worries. And I think next week, I'll make an announcement about next week because I wasn't sure if it was in person or not. So I kind of admit that I wasn't sure. And let me just post my YouTube page for you guys as well, so you guys can find it afterwards. Yeah, I wasn't sure if it's in person, but I'll make an announcement, guys, next week so that you guys will know if it's in person or online. I honestly probably think it's in person, but I'll double check. So you guys want to look at the YouTube pages here. I will post this recording right after this is finished. And I'll post, at the very least for now, I'll post at least this Shiny app here. So you guys right away, so you guys can play with it yourself. And then I'll post the full comprehensive markdown sheet afterwards, right? So I can do that for you guys. I'll post this right away. And then I'll make a more comprehensive one for you guys afterwards. And post that as well. But other than that, that's it. Just let me stop the recording.